Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we're talking all about the law school curve. And as you can probably tell from the title of this video, I have some pretty strong feelings about the curve, as I'm sure those of you who are in law school or have been through law school also have, because it is one of the, if not the most dreaded / hated aspects of law school. And it is the thing that makes law school as competitive as it is, because it immediately and inherently pits each person against everybody else in their class. And so you don't have this nice collaborative environment where everyone can win. It's very much a zero-sum game. And if I win, you lose, and vice versa. And so the thing about the law school curve that I've also recently realized is that it can have long-lasting effects for years after you actually graduate from law school. And in fact, I realized recently that I was still, when I would meet new people, sort of ranking them on this hierarchy that I can only imagine got planted into my brain during law school and because of the curve. So let's talk about it and what the deal with it is. And I would love to hear, as we go through this, kind of what y'all's thoughts and opinions and reactions are, because I think one of the most important things is just having a conversation about this stuff at all, so that we can hopefully begin to change it, or at least entertain the idea of doing it better. So what is the curve and how does it actually work? Well, if you can visualize a bell curve, the curve essentially works where there's the largest distribution of grades in the center and then a smaller distribution of grades on either side. And so there are actually 3 ways that a curve is created in law schools across the country. I didn't know that till I Googled it. But the first way is a predetermined distribution of grades, meaning that every professor in every one of their classes has to give out a certain number of A's, A minuses, B plus, B's, B minuses, C plus, C, C minus, D's, F's. You get it. And so in a 100-person class, roughly, I'm just using sort of whole numbers here, you might have 70% of the class that fall in the B range grades, 15% of the people who fall in an A range grade, and then 15% of people who fall in like the C, D, and F range of that. The second way that the curve can be created is a predetermined median. And so, for example, if a law school, you might hear people say my law school grades or has a 3.0 curve, or my law school has a 3.2 curve or a B plus curve. That's what they mean. There's a predetermined median that every professor has to hit in every one of their classes. And so that means that the professor can actually assign grades in a more flexible way, but they still have to hit that median. So if the median is 3.2 for every grade above a B plus, so an A minus, an A, or an A plus, then the professor would have to give a grade that's below the median, right, to balance it out. And then the third way, which I did not even know was a way, but the third way to create the curve is actually a not fixed curve, meaning the professor actually has more flexibility for this predetermined curve. So you can have anywhere from, like, this is just an example, but maybe a 2.8 to a 3.2 median, and the professor has more flexibility to curve the class a little higher if they feel like the students in the class did a really great job on the exam, or curve it a little bit lower if they feel like the law school, if the people in that class did not do a particularly strong job. I have never personally heard of this, but I saw it on a blog, so I wanted to include it just to be all-inclusive and thorough for you guys. But yeah, that's essentially the way that the bell curve works. And so essentially what happens is you're not only graded on your performance on the final exam, you're graded on your performance as compared to everybody else in the class. So why are we talking about this at all? Why are we making such a big deal about the law school curve? And the short answer is because the law school curve determines grades, and grades in law school have a lot of power. And specifically when we're talking about the law school curve and law school grades, we're talking about that first year of law school when they have a disproportionate amount of power. And so there are really 4 areas and reasons why law school grades have as much power as they have. And the first one I would say is scholarship money. And so there are a lot of law schools out there that offer conditional scholarships, meaning you get to keep the scholarship if you make a certain GPA or you hit a certain number percentage in the class ranking. And the other side of that coin would be if you get high enough in your class ranking, so top 10%, top 5%, depending on the law school, you can actually be eligible for more scholarship money. They might actually pay you to stay. And the reason that they might do that is because of the second reason that law school grades are so powerful. And that is because if you are looking to transfer to a higher ranked law school after that first year, that decision, at least that cutoff, is made based on your 1L year grades. And so you have to be really crazy high in the class to even be considered by most law schools. And that's going to be, again, top 5%, top 10%, top 1%, depending on the law school you're trying to get into and the law school you're coming from. The third reason that law school grades are so powerful, especially that first year, I would say is because of law review. And so when we're talking about law school extracurriculars, there are a lot of them. The one that is still considered the most prestigious is law review. And a lot of law schools determine who makes law review based in part or in whole on your 1L grades. And so every law school does it a little bit differently. The law school that I went to at the time, the top 10% automatically made it into law review. So no questions asked. You were automatically in. And then all the other spots were determined by a write-on competition. The other way that some law schools do it is on a sliding scale. So depending on the percentage of class ranking that you hit after your 1L year, maybe that has a certain point total, and then the write-on competition makes up the other point total. So law review is still determined very heavily by 1L grades. And then the biggest one, the one that we're really focusing on, and the reason we're talking about this and having this conversation at all, is the way that certain jobs are made available to you when you graduate. And so just anecdotally talking to a lot of lawyers and just seeing polls and things on LinkedIn, most people will get their first job out of law school independent of grades. That is what I've consistently heard. I don't know how true that is, but that's what people seem to think, or at least share when they're telling their first job out of law school stories. And so I tend to believe that that's true. That being said, there are a subset of jobs right out of law school that are considered the most prestigious and generally also tend to be the most high paying that definitely are dependent on your grades. And so specifically the jobs that we're talking about are big law jobs. So the jobs in the biggest law firms in the country, federal government jobs, specifically federal judicial clerkships. And I guess I would also say law school professorships, which is a process I know nothing about other than it really matters what law school you went to and the grades you got. And so when we look at those subsets of jobs that are the most prestigious, the highest paying, the most competitive, most, if not all of them, make initial cuts based on your grades and based on your class ranking before they even look at the rest of your application and consider you seriously for the position. So that is why we're here. That is why we're talking about this thing at all. So I wanted to figure out why the law school curve exists at all and how it got started. And so I Googled around, but I couldn't find when it was born or the first person to implement it or anything like that. But I have heard of a few rationales for the curve. So I wanted to share those with you guys to see what you think. Because the first reason that I've heard that we have a law school curve is because the law school final exams are written and designed in such a way that no person could ever finish them or get the entirety of points in the time period allotted. And so, for example, if a law school exam has a potential of 100 possible points, a top score on that final exam might be something like 60. And so if the top score is 60 out of 100, which would be a D in our traditional grading system, then automatically everyone would fail, ? And so if we don't curve it up, then more often than not, everybody's going to fail out. Now, that's pretty ridiculous. I think when it's broken down, I think there are I don't know if there's a lot of ways, but there are definitely several ways to deal with that, which I'll talk about here in a second, where just because somebody got 60 out of 100 or the top score was 60 out of 100, that necessarily means everybody would fail without the curve that is designed in law schools today. But that's one rationale that I've heard is to help people, right? To help curve these really difficult exams upward. The second thing that I've heard is that the curve ensures fairness across sections. So when you go to law school, I don't know if most, but a lot of law schools will have multiple 1L sections. So you might be one of 2 1L sections, or one of 3, or one of 4, depending on how many people are in your incoming class. And so I guess the idea is if you don't have a curve, then one section could get notoriously easy or nice graders, and they could have a higher GPA than another section who has traditionally harder graders and don't give out as many A's or have harder exams or that kind of a thing. Which I guess is somewhat of a reasonable explanation or rationale. But again, as we'll talk about in a second, I think there's another way to go about it that's not this like bell curve distribution where you have sort of top 10, top 15%, and then everybody else. And then the third way that I hadn't heard, but I read it on a blog, so I figured I would share it with you guys and include it here, is that the idea behind a bell curve is actually to help us as law students, because it signals to legal employers that everybody is an equal level of great. So if 70% of us are falling in the B range, like you legal employer don't need to make distinctions based on grades. Like we're all wonderful and you should hire us all or evaluate us all equally. But if you were to ask any law student if that is whether that's the intended consequence of the curve or not, whether that is the practical consequence of the curve, everyone would say no. Because if you have a curve and you have 10 to 15% distribution of A's on one end of the spectrum, then all that does is very easily indicate for legal employers who care primarily about grades, oh, here are the 10 to 15% of people that I should consider interviewing, and I should ignore the other 85 to 90% of people altogether. So I don't know how realistic that explanation is, but I read it, so I thought I'd include it here. So those are the reasons that I've either personally heard or recently read from Googling as to why the law school curve exists. But if you were to ask law students across the board, I think you would not be surprised to find that the vast majority, if not literally everyone, aggressively hates the curve and really thinks it has an element of unfairness and arbitrariness and has sort of a disproportionate negative impact on people's law school and legal careers. And it's pretty interesting because I think subconsciously for many years, I thought that the law school curve was a great thing and a fair thing and a really good indicator of ability and opportunity and all of the things, because I personally benefited from it. And it actually really helped me both in law school and in getting the first job that I got out of law school. And only after sort of reflecting on this and actually starting to coach law students and kind of see the system, deeper from the inside, have I done a 180 and decided that the law school curve is actually not a great indicator or a fair indicator, or the best way that we can actually evaluate people, and that it has a disproportionate negative impact on the opportunities that people are able to get. And so the reasons that the law school curve sucks, the main reason I guess I would say is because when we're talking about law students, we're talking about a group of people who are smart, hardworking, overachievers, go-getters, people who are really, really looking to be successful. They're excellent students. And so when you put a group of those people together and then you have them compete against one another on this curve, a lot of the differences between those sort of upper echelon grades of, difference between an A and an A minus or an A minus and a B plus are incredibly narrow differences, right? And not even kind of bringing in professors' subjective beliefs and biases and grading, but it could be the difference between a line. It could be the difference between an issue that was spotted. It could be the difference between a formatting decision. And so for that style of grading to have such a powerful effect on somebody's competitiveness for a scholarship or an extracurricular or a job opportunity is pretty nuts. And so that's the biggest one. Is I know just from coaching so many law students that this feeling of I busted my ass for 4 months, I knew the material inside and out, and the grade I got was not representative of that at all, which also gets us into, by the way, the fact that law school professors are not transparent about what they want on final exams or what they're looking for, or providing any resources in terms of how to develop that skill set. So that's kind of another conversation. But having these disproportionate impacts on people who are very, very excellent, intelligent, hardworking students. The second reason that the law school curve sucks is what we touched on earlier, which is how it inherently breeds competition and puts everyone at odds with one another, right? So if you're on a curve and there's only 15 A's that can go around, then you are not only competing against the test and against the material, you're also competing against the people who are sitting to the left and the right of you. And so having that immediate competition and that lack of sort of professional congeniality and collaboration is pretty toxic. And it really sets the stage for how the legal industry is run, in my opinion, which perpetuates that and continues that tradition along with it. And there's this sort of story that I don't know how true it is, but that you'll generally hear in law school, where there's the group of new 1Ls that sat down in an auditorium, and the dean got in front of the podium and said, look to your left, look to your right. One of you won't be here by the end of the year. And just kind of setting the stage for this sense of, us versus them, me versus you, zero-sum game. One of us has to win and one of us has to lose. And then the other thing that the law school curve, as it's currently designed, doesn't take into account is sort of the objective ability of the people in a particular class. And so a few years ago, when the pandemic hit, a lot of people applied to law school, and the sort of caliber of student was incredibly high, and the competition to just get into law school at all was off the charts. And so the students who were in each individual class in law schools across the country was really, really, really competitive in even a higher sense than it usually is, in a really impressive ability level. And I heard from several of my students that professors told them, you know, your exam was particularly good, or your class's exams were particularly strong, and in another year that would have been A-level exams, but because this year was as strong as it was, these exams were B-level exams. And so again, because you have this curve in place, it doesn't matter how many points you get or how strong your ability level is, because it's going to be comparable or compared to the other people in your class, which is something that you can't always control. So I think it's flawed in an objective way as well, and not being able to sort of recognize or reward that writing ability or intellectual ability or analytical ability based solely on the people that also happen to be in your class. And if you ever find yourself doubting how law students actually feel about the curve, all you have to do is see their reaction when they find out that a class isn't curved. And so for certain 1L electives or 2L or 3L classes that are smaller than usually 20 to 25 students, a lot of those classes are not graded on a curve, and people cannot sign up fast enough for them, because what that means is that the professor is not sort of beholden to these 5 A's and 10 A minuses. They're able to evaluate the students on what they perceive their ability or quality of their final exam to be, and inevitably that results in more of the higher grades, because as we talked about, law students in general tend to be really strong students. And so I think that's pretty telling behavior when you as a student find out that a law school class isn't curved and you run beeline straight for it as fast as you can. So as I was thinking through this topic and sort of this conversation, and I was getting super riled up about how unfair the law school curve is and how the system is rigged, which it is, by the way, and how it creates this arbitrariness and all of these things, I was feeling pretty good about what I was thinking and sort of my position on this. And then I decided, all right, well, it's easy enough to be mad at something. It's infinitely harder to come up with an alternative solution. And so as I was trying to come up with an alternative solution, I mellowed out quite a bit because I realized it actually is harder than I thought to come up with something to replace the curve with. And so if you guys have thoughts on how we can improve the law school curve or what to do instead, please let me know in the comments, because you could just be sitting on the greatest idea in the history of law school that totally revolutionizes the way that we experience law school and the way that law school is graded. So definitely share that with us and let us know. But I came up with one potential solution, and I'm curious to see what you guys think about it. So when we're thinking about the way that law school is graded, the first thing that came to mind is, why does it have to be different than the way that college is graded, right? I don't know why inherently that has to be the case. And so what I was thinking is, in the scenario that we talked about earlier, right, where the top score in the class is 60 points out of 100 points, and there's this hypothetical doomsday scenario where everybody fails because everybody got 60 or below. What if instead we take that 60 and then we set that as the bar and then allocate grades accordingly, not based on a curve, but based on 60 as the bar? So, for example, if 60 is the highest grade in the class, then we would take 90 to 100% of 60 to allocate the A's. We would take 80 to 89% of 60 to allocate the B's, 70 to 79% of 60 to allocate the C's, and 60 to 69% of 60 to allocate D's, right? So the traditional percentages that we use in high school grading and college grading. And so to run through those numbers really quickly to show you guys that I actually did the math, it would be somebody who got 54 to 60 would get an A. Someone who got 48 to 53 points would get a B. Someone who got 42 to 47 points would get a C. And someone who got 36 to 41 points would get a D. The other way that this could potentially work that my dad actually pointed out, because yes, I 100% brought this up on the family chat to see what other people's opinions were about it, because we are that nerdy, is that you could just straight up add the point difference to the total. So if, for example, there's 100 possible points, the top score gets 60, that's a 40% difference, or a 40 point difference. I don't know mathematically if this works out, but potentially you could just add 40 points to everyone's grade, right? So the person who got a 60 gets 100, the person who got a 42 gets an 82. So maybe that also works. But basically the pros of this approach that I'm at least trying to achieve are, one, we eliminate the doomsday scenario. So we take off the table that everybody's just going to automatically fail if we don't get all of the points on the exam. The second piece to that would be that every potential grade is unlimited. So there are an unlimited number of A's, just like there are in college, right? There is no cap on how many people can get whatever point totals I said, 54 to 60 points in that scenario. So you're not naturally inherently competing against everybody else in your class. You're competing against the exam, which is way healthier and creates a much more sort of beautiful experience, I think, across the board. The third piece, I think, as well, is that it doesn't eliminate grades altogether. That's true. But I think what would probably naturally happen is that there are broader swaths of people getting A-range grades. And so kind of the same thing in college, right? Everybody could potentially get a 4.0. That doesn't happen, but it's possible. And so I think the same thing might happen in law school, where you have maybe instead of 10% or 15% of people getting A-range grades, you have more like 30% or 40% of people getting A-range grades. And so you kind of broaden or widen the spectrum of people who are in sort of that first cutoff for each grade and each class in law school. So I think the biggest con to my proposed solution is being able to regulate the grading across sections, which is something that we mentioned earlier, right? So if a professor tends to have an easier exam or is an easier grader, then that section of students has the ability to get a higher GPA than students in another section where the professor might have a harder exam or be historically a tougher grader. And so I think that maybe another potential solution to this is essentially what Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and some of the other highly ranked law schools do, which is this system of high pass, pass, and low pass, as best as I can understand it. And I don't know exactly what those distributions are, but I think that it's a third, and a third. If anybody knows, let me know in the comments below. But I think it's a third high pass, a third pass, and then a third low pass. And so it's still a curve, which I guess if the idea is to abolish the curve, that kind of flies in the face of that. But I think what it does accomplish is it allows the number of students who can get sort of the A range grades or the higher range grades to be broader, deeper, wider, include more people. And I really, really like that. I think however that is accomplished is ultimately the goal, because what comes from that and what results from that is forcing legal employers to go deeper when they're evaluating candidates. I think that really is the whole point of this, that I didn't realize when I started talking, but is to expect more of legal employers, law firms, and not give them such an easy, superficial out to where they should only or do only evaluate and make initial cuts based on whether you're in the top 10% of your class or not. And I think with the bell curve system that we have in place now, it's just too easy for law firms and federal judges to make those kinds of cuts. And I think one of the rationales for the curve that I didn't mention earlier is this belief that lawyers are incredibly busy, which they are, but also so busy that they're not able to actually evaluate every single candidate or hundreds of candidates for different positions, which that is probably true. But I definitely think, especially from experience interviewing law students and summer associates and things like that, that law firms can definitely go deeper, that they definitely have the time and the energy to be able to evaluate more than one potential factor. And so if that pool of candidates is expanded based on grades, right? So a softer line, a fuzzier line, a broader line on the grade front, then ideally law firms and legal employers would look at other factors other than just that one factor. So maybe they look at grades, but they also look at work experience, and they also look at writing sample, and they also look at recommendation letters, and sort of like a similar evaluation process as companies out of college. So if you're applying for a job out of college, most, maybe all companies, I don't know that they have a strict GPA cutoff, or most of them, right? Even if you're going after something competitive. So if they see that you have high grades, that could be a thing that they value, but inevitably they're also going to look at internship experience, work experience, if there's a writing sample or a cover letter involved, and maybe rec letters. And so it puts emphasis on more factors than just the grade factor, which I think is the goal at the end of all of this. And so, I think we should be asking more of legal employers and not giving them such a freaking easy out as the way that the law school curve is set up today. So I'm curious what you guys think of my proposed approach, and kind of what your proposed approaches might be. I know after thinking about this more that it's a more complicated topic than I initially thought. But I still do think that we can do better than what we're doing now. And I think that there can be a more sort of inclusive and thorough evaluation process than the law school curve is serving up right now. So let me know y'all's thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.